So one of the things that's really critically important for us to understand when we are when we're talking about the fisheries of diversification is that it's something that's very specific to each location and style of fishing. So of course, what I'm going to say at some points is going to be very specific to Puerto Rico, but of course, some of the fisheries in Puerto Rico are very similar to some of the fisheries in the Bahamas. However, not everything will apply, but the concepts will apply. And again, of course, we would try to highlight why this is important, and we can see some of the basis of access to the means of production and how some of the things that differ specifically for fisheries. And of course, many think that the fisheries it's kind of just open access, and depending on where you're located, it also depends on what permits and what licenses you're required. So that's something that is also very important. Some places in agriculture, that's the same as well. Some places you do require a license or a permit, not just owning the land. So that's kind of the first step to make sure we're supporting fisheries that are all responsible, sustainable. But again, the first step to that is that they're also legal. So of course, this is kind of the first part is very specific to Puerto Rico. Of course, it's on the fisheries permit, the license that you're required to be a commercial fisher, but also the type of vessels that you have, what size of the vessels, what type of gear you have available to use. So of course, that's not just the gear that you have, just the tanks or the scuba gear or the diving gear. I believe in the Bahamas, hookahs are illegal as well. So that's not something that in Puerto Rico, they are as well. So again, what's available, how accessible it is, and of course, the capacity that the gear, the vessel, and the crew have to be able to implement these fisheries. So the next step, of course, is where you're fishing and what's available. So of course, here we have, as an example, we're showing Puerto Rico and Puerto Rico's jurisdictional waters, which is the image that you can see. It's the image on the right with Puerto Rico and the USVI that have this dotted lines, which those are the jurisdictional waters, and then the larger border, which is the same as the one on the left with the red border, which is the EEZ. So of course, Bahamas, you won't have to worry about the EEZ. And of course, you usually think about folks coming into your EEZ from other countries to come into fish conch. It's more the issues that you guys have on that. But of course, it's what's available. Sometimes the platform, for example, in conch fishing in Puerto Rico occurs between 60 feet to 120 feet. And of course, conch fishing in the Bahamas is very, very different in the depths that it occurs. So it's also depending, we need to see what's available for you to fish. But, jumping right into it. So some of the benefits of diversification, we can see that this is something that has been studied as well. Diversification isn't as easy as us presenting it and then you just taking tomorrow and selling different fish, but it does, there does come quite a few challenges to it, but there has been a lot of research done, and there is a lot of information that can help fishers and fish market owners and fishmongers with continuing promoting sustainable fisheries and improving their diversification of the products that they have. So, of course, one of these things, one of the challenges, it's always consumer preference. So each location has a specific consumer preference. The one variable that's very similar throughout the Caribbean is, of course, tourists. Some tourists might be very well educated and well versed on the local foods. Others are not. So tourism is also a very important one because most tourists really want to try some of the local flavor. And of course, the local flavor is what the locals have to offer. And so if you diversify your catch and diversify the offer, what's available for tourism, tourism is likely to consume it. And so, of course, we can see this, for example, as something that's really, really key, as we can see with conch. The Bahamas in conch is famous for conch. It's the capital of the world for conch. And we can see that in the dishes that you guys have. There's conch conch is served in so many different ways. However, we see the difference with Puerto Rico, and in Puerto Rico, the conch industry really only took off in the 90s. And so we can see in Puerto Rico that there's only really one main dish to serve conch, and it's a conch salad. Not ceviche, not the raw conch salad, but the boiled conch salad. And so that's kind of the main dish. And so we can see that you have gone into the diversification of how you serve conch because it's your main dish. However, there's also additional species that would help reduce some of the pressures, alleviate some of the pressures on these main target species like conch. And of course, one that I know the folks in Bahamas know about, it's lionfish. That's an easy one. But there's also other species that can, that can support limited harvest. We can see how queen triggerfish has always been a Caribbean favorite, but also it's a it's a good dish for tourists, just because we call it a beginner fish since there's not a lot of spines. So that's one of the ones that can also kind of make it out from the community into kind of the restaurants. And of course, this is one of the catches that we can promote, can substitute and can help substitute some of the other species that have a bit more pressure, like parrotfish. But then we can also see croaker, the other dish that's on the side, the croaker. I believe these croaker are also available in Bahamas. But again, they're a bit further out, not in the near shore, but the habitat is available. So these are species that, of course, that are available. And then the last one is it's the acule. Acule is it's a catch that's available worldwide. It's really high in protein. It's really famous in Hawaii, for example. However, in the Caribbean, mostly only small coastal communities are aware about this fish. And so it's something that is really interesting how we can learn about some of the more popular dishes from elsewhere that are available to continue to help diversifying the catch and the offer for that's available for folks, but also for that can continue generating income. We can also see, for example, taking an example of Puerto Rico, of course, lobster in Bahamas is also very big. However, we can also see that there's different markets for the different types of lobster. So, for example, slipper lobster or Spanish lobster in Puerto Rico has a higher demand within the Asian community than regular lobster. So, slipper lobster are separated out because, again, they do have a higher demand, have a higher price, and are not as common as the regular spiny lobsters. Of course, this fetches a better price. Other species like the spotted goatfish. Spotted goatfish, goatfish in general are fish that garnish a really high value. We can see it in Spain and in Portugal. These are fish that are worth 30 to 35 euros per pound. And of course, these are seasonal catches that you can continue to do with lobster traps, and of course, following local regulations. But there's ways that you can diversify it, and of course, continue to add to the food security, but also to the other means of generating income during other fisheries closures, and as well as increasing production, while at the same time not increasing production of species that have already a high pressure on them. So it's really something that can be a benefit for the environment as well as the local economies. Of course, this is going into the pelagics and making sure that we don't just sell fish as fish. So fish as fish, making sure that we have the proper names and ensuring that we're marketing it correctly. And again, so a lot of the context are important too. So a lot of the constraints that are present is like I said before at the very beginning, is the consumer preference and consumer demand. So sometimes that's something that can be a barrier to the fisher as well as to the fish dealer, because if you don't have demand for your product, then it becomes, it just sits on your shelf. And of course, with fish products, that's something that you need the freezer space for things that are higher in demand. So again, it's a very careful balance that you can't just jump into diversification, but easing into it to see how, exploring into it to see how consumer preference is applied is really critically important. And like I said, diversification, fisheries diversification has been identified as one of the goals for achieving sustainable fisheries. I mean, of course, you can see this is these are our regular catches in Puerto Rico of parrotfish. So you can see that there can be very targeted and directed catches that aren't necessarily the best for the environment. So diversifying catches is always something that's positive. And then that's why we try to continue promoting and really try to make sure that folks understand that, of course, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but the benefits that diversifying brings in the long term, in the short term and in the long term, are both economic and environmental. And like I said, I think I jumped ahead a bit in the consumer preferences, but it's really understanding how consumer preferences affect the market and affect what's available and affect the catch. So there's two things that go into that you need to take into account, is what's locally abundant, as well as what fish are being underutilized. So underutilized fish are fish that folks usually don't take into consideration because they don't think as food fish. And that occurs in many places, many places. Like I said, for example, spotted goatfish is one that is usually underutilized because it's not seen as a food fish. However, it is, and it depends on how it's marketed. So, for example, that's one that's critically important. The other aspect of this is, of course, again, continuing with the focus of the underutilized species. So, for example, since I believe it's since the 80s, the diamondback squid, or the deep water squid fishery, it's been promoted throughout the Caribbean by various organizations, FAO, other NGOs, foreign aid organizations like the JICA, Japanese International Aid Organization. And it's really only taken off in very few places. In Jamaica, it's taken off a little bit. In Trinidad, there's been some fisheries, but in the Dominican Republic, it's actually one of the few fisheries in the Dominican Republic that is very, very healthy, and that they've had consistent catches since it started. So this is a fishery in the Dominican Republic, in Los Cacaos, which is in the northeast of the country, where fishers target diamondback squid. And so, for example, this is a fishery that we've taken on in Puerto Rico and in the USVI, that we've taken fishers from Puerto Rico to learn it firsthand from fishers in the Dominican Republic. So see how we can replicate and then, of course, adapt to the local situations. So this, and then, for example, for the Bahamas, this is something that could be of great interest because of the size of the squid. The species of the squid, the lifespan is between 1 and 2 years. It's a very short generation life. They reproduce through mass reproduction and with the egg masses that they release. So it's very, and there's no the main way to fish diamondback squid isn't through a massive industrial way. So it's keeping it small scale and artisanal, which is something that's really important, not to overfish the species. And why I say that it's really important for something that could be very available and of interest to Bahamas is because the squid meat can be prepared very similar to many of the dishes that conch in the Bahamas is prepared. Conch fritters, the other one that's covered with egg and breaded. So the conch salad. So there's many ways. So the texture and the taste are very similar, and so it's something that can complement it. Again, helping alleviate some of the pressure from conch, but at the same time, creating a new fishery that allows for additional income for Bahamian fishers to be able to continue their work in the water. At the same time, it's again a new product for Bahamas to continue uh, to support their local economies as well as their food security issues again when dealing with disaster response. So this is something that I believe that is going to be continued to expand. I feel that the Bahamas, once it reaches the deeper waters, of course, this is a deep water species, but in the deeper waters of Bahamas, it is available. This species is present it's present throughout the entire world in all tropical waters. So it's something that we can continue to really promote to make sure that that small scale and artisanal fishery communities can continue to go build into this fishery to help them with their income generation. And again, promoting sustainable and responsible fishing. The other thing that we do strongly believe as well is to partnering with nonprofits to make sure that what's local and what's being caught responsibly is also promoted. That's also a way that you can address a lot of the consumer preference. Many times, of course, from the fisher point of view and from the fish dealer point of view, your job is to catch fish and sell fish. So it's very difficult to go into additional aspects like education or outreach. And so working together with other organizations to help build consciousness and awareness about what is available locally is really important. And so that's, the Bahamas has a great network of nonprofits that are willing to do this. And of course, I've been working around Conch to continue this type of effort. So again, and that's where it's available, helping other folks ensure to know where they can catch fish, where they can sell fish, where they can buy fish. And of course, this helps restaurants, small restaurants, folks, folks that are staying in Airbnbs now that are growing, that are buying their own food. This is also something that directly affects the tourism industry as well. And of course, for many in the entire Caribbean, tourism is one of the main drivers of all local economies. So that's why there's such an emphasis on making sure that we're able to bring tourists and the tourism sector into what's available in the local catches. And of course, that's really recognizing how there's plenty of species. There's a lot of species right now. The Atlantic stock of swordfish it's really being promoted to be fished again. Back in the 80s and 90s, this is a fishery that was closed, but thanks to that closure, it is now available to be fished again. It's something that it was rebuilt. This is really important. It's really important for these communities to be aware, because a lot of the industrial fishing sector is aware, and they are fishing them. And of course, this is something that the conversation for industrial fishing versus small scale fishing is the topic for another time. But of course, what we like to bring is that to ensure that folks are aware that these are species that you can catch in a very responsible way, that do bring a lot of food security and do fetch a good price. These are top quality species that are available. So we always want to keep promoting communities to make sure that they are available and they're aware that what you can catch and what you can't, and what you can continue to promote to catch even more. So, it's a very delicate balance, but in fisheries diversification, it has the potential to increase the ecological and economic sustainabilities of marine fisheries. So that's why we always really, really try to really promote it. And again, this is very, very subjective to each location. But it's something that it's something that we need to continue promoting and continue researching, because a lot of the research that we do on our end as biologists and conservationists is usually to protect species, which is very much needed. We need to continue protecting species that are of concern, that are vulnerable, that are threatened. At the same time, those same adjectives apply to coastal communities. They're threatened, they're vulnerable, and we need to help continue promoting and protecting those local economies. And of course, this is always around disaster relief, which is really critical to the livelihoods and resilience of these communities. So I think we can start the conversation and have a couple of questions. I see that there's one question here already about, is there a market for blue crabs? And so I think this is that's actually a really great question, because there really is. And so of course, depending on where you're located. And so I can give you a quick example for Puerto Rico. That in Puerto Rico, there are blue crabs, but there isn't a specific blue crab fishery. Folks do catch blue crabs, and many times blue crabs, the meat is taken out, is doused with a little bit of soy sauce so that it resembles land crab a bit more, because the local population prefers land crab to blue crab. However, that's, when I'm speaking to the fisheries sector, it's I always, to me, that example of what's happening here in Puerto Rico is you're taking filet mignon, or you're taking prime rib, and you're grounding it up to make hamburgers. So nothing wrong with the hamburger. However, you're taking a product of high value, and you're turning it into something of lesser value. So blue crabs have higher value in the market than land crabs. The meat, it's the white meat, you use it for crab cakes and a bunch of other things. That if you sell the crab, 1 pound of blue crab meat could get you 6 pounds of land crab meat. So the worth. So it's always making sure that we address the market, right? Where is the market, and how can we increase communities' benefit? Of course, that's directly on how the benefit. Sometimes it's the protein, the food that's needed immediately. Then sometimes it's also the income, because if you're hungry and if you need food, if you need your income, it's better to sell that blue crab than it is to eat it, because you can get more food by selling it. So it's one of these things that's really interesting. In Bahamas, the blue crab is all throughout, up through the Atlantic. So I'm sure I would need to see some of the areas and some of the regulations of Bahamas, but I'm whether they're present or not, I'm sure they're in the area, in a lot of the mangrove areas. So it's depending. We would need to see how that how blue crab for the Bahamas could play into the diversification. However, I do know for a fact that a lot of the folks that would visit Bahamas, mainly a lot from the States, that's something that they do eat on holiday. A lot of the folks that come visit Maryland and the Washington, D.C. area from outside and from other states, this is what they're ordering. So I know for sure that is something that either they're already ordering in the Bahamas or something that can continue to be developed. And Nick, I don't know if you want to open it up or how we can do questions, or if there's anything.
Okay, let's, I don't see any questions in the, there we go, Mr. Walker. Are there specific traps for blue crabs, or what is used to catch them?
Yeah, they're specific traps for blue crabs. It's usually small. They're similar to fish pots, and so it's where you put them in the depth and location, the bottom where they're located, that you can catch them. So it's one of those things that's actually a fishery that has been fully developed. I mean, before I would be able to say like, yes, do it in the Bahamas, I would need to look specifically about your fisheries regulations to see what's allowed and what's not. But I'm sure that that's something that can be done sustainably, and so that the fishing technology and how to catch blue crabs is already there. It's quite simple, actually. Straightforward, I mean. Not simple. Fishing is never simple.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Raimundo? Come on, guys, let's take advantage of this opportunity. Let's get these questions in.
So one of the other things that I didn't mention, but can also be part of the diversification is, it can be diversification in gear or the way that you're operating. For example, what we recently hosted an exchange with Bahamas about doing conch aquaculture. So that's also something that is possible. Conch ranching, which some folks are starting to do in Grand Bahama, I believe. That's it.
We have another question. What kind of pushback are you experiencing from the fishermen when trying to get them to catch something different from what they're used to catching?
Yeah, so this is, we have experiences, also some don't have any problems. And at the very beginning, when we started a lot of this work, we had a lot of trouble. And so, for example, one that would seem easy, I'll give you one that was from the beginning, and we still have this issue till today, is with lionfish. So you would think, oh, there's a lot of marketing behind lionfish. There's a lot of marketing behind lionfish. So folks know about it, it's in the press, it's everywhere. However, it's fishermen are, it's a product. So if you don't, fish to them are the product that they're harvesting. So it's not necessarily like the taste, if it's great or it's not, it's will folks buy this from me? And so there's still a lot of restaurants that aren't buying lionfish, even though there's a big marketing machine behind folks promoting lionfish. Sometimes, sometimes it's an issue that, fishers will go out and they'll catch it and then no one's buying it. And so again, a lot of the times, fishers, that's not what fishers do, or fish dealers. Fish dealers, they don't work on the marketing. They don't. So you need to make sure that the education, that folks are aware of what's going on. But that's kind of the big one, the consumer preference and making sure that you have it out. So for example, right now what we're focused as we work a lot with the restaurants that want local catch. So we ensure that the restaurant is open to serving fish of the day, so that they can have something fresh, something local, but they're not tied, their menu isn't tied down. At the same time, working with the chefs in those restaurants, they're aware that certain type of fish can be replaced. You can't replace mahi for a grouper. The meat and some of the taste is different. So the white flaky, a bit more fatty, or some more firm. So sometimes you do have to work with those chefs and those restaurants to understand how they would use it. So you are able to tell them how it can be used and how can it be cooked. So that's kind of the biggest problem is really, it's really making sure that the demand is there. And so that's sometimes we create the demand. We talk directly to restaurants saying, listen, we're going to be bringing in some squid the next few days. Can you take it? And they're like, yes. So we have it. Again, when we're beginning to create the new fisheries or creating diversification, we're creating the market before we have the catch, so that we know we can assure the fisher that he has an out. Because again, there's nothing worse for a fisher or a fish dealer than having catch that you can't sell. And again, and that's bad for the environment as well. Then you have something that you killed that you can't use. So that's something that's really critically important, is making sure that you're working with the end consumer, whether it be restaurants or people, individuals, or other fish buyers. And again, to me, it's one of those things that Bahamas is promoting those connections between the larger hotels, or even the smaller hotels and restaurants, that they can continue to advertise what's local. And again, folks know conch is from the Bahamas. They know that's big, but it's really great that you'd be able to bring other things that are also local, kind of just to complement that palate. Because again, a tourist might come down and if he's there for a week, he's going to eat conch 3 times. But of course, foreign folks they're not used to being able to chewing conch all the time. So they're going to try it, but it's good to give them that variety. Okay, so let's see. I see a couple of questions.
Blue crab seems to be piquing the interest. So what type of bait do you use when catching these crabs? Is there a particular bait?
Yeah, There, I mean, so there's a lot of a lot of different types of baits. For example, some folks in Puerto Rico, at least, some folks use cow hides. They go to the ranching industry and they use um, some of some of the skin of the cow to use that. Some folks use fish heads. These type of crabs are kind of they're detritivores, so they kind of just pretty much any. It's more about the location. You want to make sure that you're putting it in the habitat that you're supposed to be putting the traps to bring them into the trap. And of course, you want the sizes that you want. But it's mostly other kind of the easy way to go about that is kind of just getting some of the fish products. If someone is fishing mahi and they have a mahi head or just like the spine or just like some of the innards, you can use some of that as well. So I see there's a really interesting question there about. Yeah, I mean, blue crabs, they're on the bottom, so they're feeding on everything that dies off and all the poop from all the animals, and so they're feeding on that. But what's the best agency to inform and educate the audience on the benefits of readily available? So that's a lot of audiences. That's a lot of agencies. So for example, as part of the campaign they have about conch, Bahamas National Trust could be a really great partner to help promote what other fisheries products are available, kind of to help relieve the pressure on conch. At the same time, the government, the tourism board, the tourism department or ministry, they usually have funding to promote kind of destinations or areas or something that's really Bahamian. And so there's funding there to say, hey, check this out. This is Bahamian as well. And so they can use it to promote. So those are kind of two quick ones, again, because of the benefits of diversification. So it's small NGOs, again, the government itself. Government is already doing that. So the government is already doing some of this promotion. So it's good to help give them more information and say, listen, Bahamas is known for this as well. So if we look at Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico has a tourism board that helps promote Puerto Rico to draw tourists from elsewhere. And so, they have, again, so this is already taxpayer funding. So you've already paid for this. So it's just making sure that it's on their radar. So Puerto Rico, they're saying, oh, look at our beach. Not just look at our beaches. They're beautiful. Of course, it's the Caribbean. So that's easy. We all can do that. Everybody in the Caribbean can do that. So they start saying, hey, look at this local coffee. Visit the mountains of Puerto Rico and you can drink local coffee grown in these mountains. So it's like, oh, it brings up this feeling that if you're leaving Amsterdam, or if you're leaving New York or even Miami, you want to leave those areas. You don't want to be reminded of the place that you're going on vacation. So it's the more products that are the more products that are local, the better you can continue to promote your island. And of course, all of this is kind of with the caveat that it needs to be done legally and responsibly, and according to local regulations. The blue crabs feed us.
I think we have one more question on the blue crab. How do you store them once caught?
Yes, so to store them, there's a couple ways. Some folks freeze them as well. Some folks have pools that they keep them there, just depending on the market that they have. But this is, for example, I remember that's great that you folks are interested in blue crabs because the blue crab, I mean, that's an industry. If you look blue crabs of Chesapeake Bay, you're gonna find more than enough information because this is an industry that blue crab fishery is developed throughout the U.S., but not only just the U.S., but throughout Latin America. So it's something that the Bahamas can step into that. I feel that it's very similar. For example, right now in Puerto Rico, that's one of the things that we're trying to learn from the Bahamas with conch, about diversifying that because there's other ways to do it, especially again the cracked conch, and so all these things are just so wonderful that once Puerto Rico tries cracked conch, they're gonna go crazy for it. I'm not even kidding. So for you guys to be going into blue crab, I see it's very similar because again the traps, it's not something that is done. It can be done in a very small scale and artisanal way that can produce enough catch. And again, most of the times depending if you know, of course, for local use, the storage is it wouldn't be very different than other crustaceans like lobsters. And so yes, so blue crabs do feed on some of the similar items as lobsters, but it's more about how you catch them and where you're putting the trap that would also make that difference, so that you're not catching lobsters. So you wouldn't be putting blue crabs are not gonna you're gonna find them on the reef. It's gonna be closer to the mangrove and kind of some of those muddy bottoms, some of the silty bottoms, because that's where they're going under, and again, you know, a lot of these decaying items.
Okay, we have another question about the blue crabs. You mentioned cowhides. Do they feed on similar items like lobsters?
Yeah, they do. They're kind of those crustaceans that live on the bottom, right? So again, it's more where you would find them. So like I said, you wouldn't find them so much on the reef, but more in the type of bottoms that they're at. So that's where. But you could use very similar bait, depending on what bait you're using. So on lobster traps, but it would be very similar. That it would, you know, fish heads or other stuff like that as well.
I think that's it for the questions for now. I don't know if you have any other information you may want to share. And let's see if we get any more questions. Okay, participants, do you have any other questions for Raimundo? Now is the time.
So yeah, so Kendanique, I mean that's one of those things that I feel that there's going to be so many things that are available in Bahamas that are being underutilized, especially to some of the near shore fisheries, but as well some of the deep water fisheries, that aren't that usually you only hear about folks that are in the recreational fishing that are taking advantage of for the industry, but you know, for the commercial side, it's also available. So it's also really important to see that, because there's a lot of capacity on the sports fishing, recreational fishing side in Bahamas. There's a lot of capacity, a lot of knowledge that sometimes a lot of that knowledge in the sports fishing, recreational side for tourism does also apply for the commercial side. So that's also really important to make sure that continue making those bonds and learning or having those exchanges. Sometimes it's even the same folks that are doing commercial fishing or going from recreational fishing and sports fishing to also going to some commercial fishing as well. So it's diversifying, and that's another aspect of diversification. That's the first, diversifying your income, but it's the same principles apply. So that's also something that, you know,
What about the market value? US dollar, what's the market value? Look.
So yeah, I mean, it really depends. That it's one of those things that a lot of the demand will depend on on local prices, and so also how imports are. So I mean, this is why I was saying that for Bahamas, it's going to be really important, because you know, if I believe, I don't know if it's the law passed or it's going to be passed, but or if already passed about, you know, banning conch exports, and so that's going to make either conch be a lot more available in Bahamas, or it's going to reduce the catch, or it's going to reduce the price. The local Bahamian conch is going to be flooded. It's going to be flooding the market because you can't export it anymore. So there's a lot of you know, things that you need the reason to diversify is to make sure. So no, in Puerto Rico, there I see that there's another question if we have
Blue crab farm.
blue crab farms, and we don't have any blue crab farms in Puerto Rico. There's very limited catch of blue crabs in Puerto Rico. There exists, but there isn't.
Can it be farmed in the Bahamas? Which area is best for farms?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be able to answer that right away. I would need to see again about some of the fisheries regulations, uh, as well as you know what's allowed and what's not. But so that's a question that I couldn't answer you right now.
Okay, so maybe we can get back to Mr. Desire on that then.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And I know you mentioned just a few seconds, well, a few minutes ago, you mentioned about a ban for exporting conch, which I didn't hear about. So I'm just curious to know if any of the fishers here with us could maybe, you know, give us an answer or provide any information on that. Just I'm just curious.
Yeah, yeah. There's a measure to kind of protect conch that we were hearing about and some of the exports. So I don't know if it happened or if it was going to happen, but of course that has many implications on conch prices all around, specifically for the Bahamas as well. So it's something that yeah, that's important.
And I see another question here. It's in the chat. If blue crab is in demand, I guess what they're trying to ask, will there be a shortage of the species in the future? And is there a sustainable, I guess, how sustainable will it be?
Yeah, that's why I said, you know, that's why I said it's really important to see how abundant, you know, one of the key things for diversification is that make sure it's locally abundant or underutilized. So that's important. But again, like I said, so aquaculture, for example, raising blue crabs, it can be both. It can be like kind of similar to what we're doing with conch in Puerto Rico, that we're doing to restock wild populations of conch. At the same time, we're also promoting commercialization of conch aquaculture. So that can be done as well with blue crab. So that's something that, you know, there's some of the details around that to see what's legal, what's not. And of course, I don't know if there's a limits on gear or quotas on the catch for blue crab, but you know there is a blue crab again. Blue crab is it's throughout the region, so it's something that exists throughout the region. So it's something that Bahamas could if it's overfished, it could be overfished easily, depending if everybody started fishing blue crab tomorrow, it could be overfished. So again, that's why I say it's really important to begin exploring those other species that are potential to be included in diversifying what's available or what the offer and the demand. But at the same time, it's coming from the basis that, you know, that if it's available there, it's something that a certain amount could likely.
Raimundo? I think we may be having somewhat of a bad connection. Can someone? There we go. I think we lost you for a minute. I think we lost you for a minute, Raimundo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was saying that there's someone in the chat that I was asking about the conch being banned. Is that the exports? There was discussions about the export of conch being banned. Of course, not the fishing, but the export. And so someone mentioned in the chat that nothing's been concrete yet, but there was those discussions that were happening.
Yeah.
And of course, those measures would be to protect conch, right? So I don't know, because there's too much fishing, there's too much export, because that's where the main conch, the majority of the conch fish in the Bahamas leaves the Bahamas, and so, you know, it's to ensure that there's enough conch to protect the conch, so it doesn't become overfished or goes extinct. So that's one of the reasons why it was proposed. At the same time, it's one of those things that if you are going to continue allow it to be fished for local consumption, that could cause all that conch that was going to be exported not to be available in Bahamas. And of course, conch prices in Bahamas could drop a lot if the supply is really increased that much. So new limits would need to be established to make sure that those prices don't crash. Because fishers and fishing communities and dealers still are gonna need to make what they're making while they're exporting those conch. So it's a major client, the export market that you're closing off. So it could be something that could really harm local communities. And of course, it's not that it wouldn't be needed. Of course, if it's something that's needed, that's really critically important. But it's how it's done, and what measures are put into place. And again, this is why diversification again is really important, so that not just one species is what an industry is dependent on. Even though because it's always going to be something, the major industry. That's what it's known for.
Okay. I don't see any more questions just yet. I don't know if we want to give it another few minutes to see if anything pops up. And then if not, I will leave it to you to close us off. Okay, maybe I think your information was that informative that we don't have any more questions. So over to you to just close us out of the session. Any last remarks or information you want to share?
Yes, of course. This is I'm really happy that we were able to do this with folks in Bahamas. There's Bahamas has such a rich culture within the fishing sector, and working with World Central Kitchen, making sure that they're reaching out to the fisheries sector as well, and helping folks move towards improving their resiliency is really important. Island nations are one of the most vulnerable during these times of climate change, so it's really important to continue to diversify our income, diversify the industries in order to improve resilience. So I'm really happy all the folks were here. You had some questions. We had a good discussion on the blue crab. That's really great. And again, this is coming from the point of view that sustainable fisheries are possible. We don't necessarily need to go into industrial fishing. There are small-scale ways that we can provide a good living and provide good productivity for our countries. And so this is not an end-all be-all. This is kind of the beginning of the conversation. This is where we're trying to continue to promote that things can be done responsibly in the fisheries sector.